Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Today I have Andrew Cooper, President of LibertyWorks and co-founder of the Conservative Political Action Conference, joining us today. Hello Andrew, how you going? Thanks for coming on.
Hi Florian. Thanks Florian. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to bring you on to discuss a few things, a few questions, particularly just, the state of Australia, the state of advocating for personal liberty and libertarianism here in Australia at the moment, because, you're following the news. You can't even leave your home out of 5 kilometres in Victoria. There are all these restrictions on our personal liberties that are coming down upon us. If you're even suggesting or advocating for liberty, you kind of get branded as a monster and slapped down by the media and everyone at the moment. So I thought it'd be great to bring you on board and to get your insight and perspective, because you've started LibertyWorks, you've been fighting the good fight for some time now. Why don't you, before we get into that, if you give us a bit of background, how you got down in this path, why you started LibertyWorks and your journey?
I think the most accurate answer to that question is I'm probably partly insane, because it's a difficult challenge because. We'll get into it later, but I mean, people are basically rationally ignorant of politics. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be engaged in politics because you can't influence very much. But we can talk about that later if you like. Look, I was involved in business a long time, involved in sort of software and property ventures, and had spent 20 years arguing with people over barbecues and beers about the state of the nation, and decided, instead of crapping on at those sort of functions, perhaps I should actually do something about it. So started LibertyWorks with some colleagues that were as committed to it as I am, and we've managed to gather up people along the way. And, I guess we're making a little bit of impact around the place, but, it's difficult because, government Australia's a very government-heavy place, and I venture to say if we would have this conversation 6 months ago, it would be quite different to the conversation we're going to have now. And I would have been disappointed 6 months ago about the influence of government over our lives. Now I'm frankly appalled.
Because if I'll just bring up the LibertyWorks website, and I mean, one of your principles is you've got free market capitalism is a win-win system. Government operates a win-lose system. They're picking winners. Personal liberty helps power progress. And the one line I stole from your LinkedIn was, you're an Australian-based non-profit organisation that advocates for a drastic reduction in government control over people's economic and personal lives. And that's probably one of the themes of my channel here repeatedly again and again, particularly the rants when we see how much government is getting involved. But one thing you touched on there is that you stepped up and you got involved rather than just having the barbecue chat. And maybe we can segue into just the government encroaching on our lives. But do you think Australians are they becoming more interested in politics now than opposed to 6 months later? Do you think what's happening here will wake more people up, or is it still going to be just, she'll be right, mate, tick and flick at the voting booth, not even worrying about anything?
That's a really difficult question, Florian. I think my perception is we're becoming more rationally ignorant of politics. And I think those that are selling their messages are becoming much more expert at appealing to people that only floss over the information. And I think we can see that in what's happening at the moment. We've had, some months ago, let's pick an issue with COVID. So if we pick masks, for example, 3 months ago, no requirement to wear masks. The experts were telling us they don't really do much. They may stop you spreading the virus, but it was incongruous, right? Because every health worker was wearing a mask, But, most people don't look at this with challenging eyes. They just accept that this is the information. Now you can't walk around in Victoria without wearing a mask, right? But no one cares. It's just the way it is. And I think we're just much more accepting and less critical of government. than what I recall, certainly my youth, and that may be just my personal journey. Maybe that's different for others. So I think we're possibly the frog in the ever increasing heating water. Okay, we're not at boiling point yet, but certainly it feels like it's got a little hotter in the last 6 months.
Well, it's interesting you raised the point about the COVID and the masks as one example. I read a paper from 2006 looking at every single one of the interventions that was made right now, all these lockdown restrictions, and was quite critical of them because of the economic impacts that it would have and the questionable outcome that it might have on mitigating the disease spread. And it's not really discussed in the media. Are you noticing? It only seems to be one argument put forward and everything else is dismissed.
Yeah, the media certainly feels like it's very light on these days, doesn't it? There's, I heard Dan Andrews 3 days in a row stand up in his press conference and say, direct to the camera just last week, that the virus does not discriminate on the basis of age. Like a literal quote. He did that 3 days in a row. And we know that the average age of the person that dies is 80 and rising. We know that, the odds of dying as a 20-year-old, well, no one's died as a 20-something-year-old. There's been a couple of 30-year-olds and a couple of 50-odd-year-olds died. But everyone is dying. Is clearly the virus discriminates, but not one reporter stood up 3 days in a row and said, what do you mean? Why are you saying that? They just accept it. And so I think the lack of criticism, the lack of critical thinking certainly extends into the media as well. The media is a competitive environment. They're under lots of pressure, and Channel 10 just sacked a whole bunch of people. So maybe they're just resource poor. Maybe they don't have time to think. But if they don't have time to think, it's certainly showing, right?
So the media isn't malicious. They simply don't have time to think. I'll quote you on that one. I like that. That's good. That's a positive spin you're putting on it. I mean, but you're right there. If we just had every day the Premier was listing off all the people that were passing in aged care homes, it wouldn't be much different than we have now. We'd have all these people frantically worrying about,
Florian, I just lost you there. Sorry, just repeat that. If every day.
If we had the same thing happening every day, where the Premier of Queensland would come up and list all the people that died in aged care homes every day, it'd be so many went for the flu, so many went through a gastro bug, or something's going around. Because that's the sad reality of going into aged care. You're usually on the way out if you're at that age, and I've seen that myself with family members. So it seems a bit odd that there's some people even over 100 that were passing from this pandemic, and we're shutting down the whole economy. And surely they have to realize that this is going to have impact on people's lives, on their livelihoods. Are they just choosing to ignore it, or the average punter doesn't care as long as the free money comes out? And
I think if we look at history, one thing that stands out is that when people are prepared to give up their liberties, it's when they're frightened. So wartime, they give it up. If they feel that there's an external threat at all, and this has been painted as a kind of a wartime, external threat that we need to fight, that's when they're prepared to give up their liberties. But I've been, frankly, Florian, I'm sure you're the same, I've been absolutely shocked to the degree to which Australia has just stepped aside and let the authoritarians come in and sweep it all away. And in some sort of weird Stockholm syndrome situation, many of them are actually enjoying it, and it just doesn't. I mean, if it just doesn't sit right with me. There's just something. There's some sort of mass psychological effect going on around the world at the moment, and it's a repeating cycle, of reinforcing cycle. I suspect that'll all come crumbling down, and what we've seen happen in New Zealand with this whole eradication, win the war, and everything. The experts said eradication's virtually impossible, and yet the politicians took New Zealand down this path. I suspect Australia is wanting to go down this path, but the evidence, the scientists are saying that it's not really possible. And, I don't know enough about the science to form a judgment, but believing in science seems to be a very selective kind of enterprise, right? On some subjects, we were told we must believe in the science, and then on other subjects, on other matters, believing in the science seems to be pretty optional. Now, if you're an authoritarian that's looking to increase the expanse of government across the economy, believing in the science and using COVID to do that, believing in the science seems to be an option that you don't really have to take up.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there with it coming right back to fear. And this is I'm noticing it in the comments on my videos, or even correspondence I'm getting from viewers. I used to love your channel, but we need to make these restrictions. We need to do that. There's a line. There's a line in the sand, I think, where people won't realize that they actually are willing to accept authoritarian rule over them until they're afraid. And some people are starting to realize, okay, they'll submit to this authority because that's their fear threshold and they've never encountered it. And you see the Karen meme of the overly sensitive person screaming at people to comply. It's all going throughout. You're seeing it all over the world now. They're people just terrified. And so how do you make a valid counter argument to this? How do you push forward for individual liberty here? Maybe there are people watching and thinking, how can we win people over when you can't give them freebies all the time? You have to advocate for individual responsibility. How do you do it?
Well, look, I call myself a libertarian because I believe it's a very simple principles, and one simple way to explain what a libertarian is that we believe that you shouldn't hurt people and you shouldn't take their stuff. And I'm sure that's something that you would subscribe to, and I would suspect that 99% of the population would subscribe to those very simple principles. Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. And if you subscribe to that very simple principle, it provides a basis of which to sort through difficult political issues. So if you take the George Floyd sort of killing in the US, it seemed that polarized people. As either you supported the police or you supported the response, the Black Lives Matter response and whatnot. As a libertarian, I can subscribe to my principles and say, well, don't hurt people. Well, the policeman hurt that guy. He had plenty of opportunity to release the man. He looked secured. The courts will sort it out, but it looked that he was hurting that person and ultimately killed that person. There may be mitigating circumstances, who knows, but that's the way it looked. And so from my point of view, I can fall back on my libertarian thinking. Well, don't hurting people, and we all can, right? That's not quite right. But that doesn't mean that I have to support the rioting and the looting and the destruction of property in response to that. I can also, as an adult, hold two thoughts at once. That's wrong as well. Don't take people's stuff, don't destroy their property, and don't hurt them. So that's kind of pretty easy for most people to understand. They sort of think, okay, yeah, sure, we're all libertarians, right? Or classical liberals, or whatever, label you want to put on it. Where it gets a little bit complicated is when you look at government programs. And government programs are essentially, from a libertarian's point of view, is taking somebody else's property and giving it to someone else, spreading it around. And that's where my principles start to question many government programs, because you know what, there may be a valid reason why you might take someone else's property and spread it around. For example, law enforcement may be one of those. Perhaps as a libertarian, I believe that my life, your life, everyone's lives is worth protecting. Murder is a bad crime, and we need some sort of method of protecting us all. So most libertarians would say, you know what, we each chip in a little bit of money, a little bit of taxation, we pay for a police force, we pay for a court system. That's all fine. Some libertarians might even argue that there might be other things that we should pay for as well. Defence force, for example. It's all about protecting us. But then you look at some of the expansive government programs that seem entirely unnecessary, and what you're really doing to fund those programs is you're taking enormous amounts of money off, everyone, and you're giving it to certain sections of society as kind of gifts. And you give them for political reasons. And what it really means, if you look at the philosophy, if you look at what we all believe in, don't take people's stuff, well, that's what government does. It takes your stuff and it gives it to other people. And in many cases, it really hurts. It keeps people in poverty, it keeps people earning a proper income. And I don't think in a large majority of cases, I think there's no strong argument to why government should be doing these things, particularly when the private sector can step in and, in the main, do them much better than government can in any case.
See, that's the problem is it becomes an emotional argument there. A lot of people will just default onto an emotional position, and you're the bad guy. You're the bad guy, you know, putting...
Why do I hate old people, right? Why do I hate old people?
Yeah, why do you hate old people, Andrew? Come on, what's going on? Why do you hate this? Why do you hate that?
Why do I want to kill grandmothers? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, why do you want to kill grandmothers? Why are you making people starve to death? Because you're taking money off the poor and all these things. But really, when you frame it well, they're involuntarily giving up their money to the government every bloody week when they get a paycheck.
And this is the thing, Florian, if I may. So we're involuntarily giving up the money to the government, right? So the government uses the promise of jail and force to take our money. And this is what I love about the capitalist system. The capitalist system only works on voluntarily, you and I agreeing. If we form a transaction, we're both happy. The capitalist system's a system of agreement. It only works if I agree to buy something off you, or you agree to provide a service to me or a product on a price that we both agree on. And if we don't both agree, we can both walk away. It's a voluntary system. When the government gets involved, it's all about force and guns. And we see that young girl that had a lawful reason to be walking around in Melbourne on a public thoroughfare in a chokehold by police, right? And that's what government does. It doesn't mean to, or they say they won't, but when you involve government, their only mechanism, it's not voluntarism. It's not, we're acting in a voluntary fashion. The only way they get us to do things is by forcing us. And the only way to get that girl who, it appeared that had a lawful reason to be walking around without a face mask, the only way we get her to comply is to put her in a chokehold. And this, we can argue about whether that's right or wrong, but that's how government works. And it's different.
That's the eventual outcome of any defiance to the state, one way or another. That'll be the eventual progression. If you're being rebellious over one thing, maybe paying a parking fine, you'll eventually get to the point where they're putting you in a jail cell and they're forcing you in there.
That's right. And that's the implied threat behind all government interaction is force, right? You're forced into doing it. It doesn't matter whether it's registering your car or whatever. It's all force. And when we talk about morality, the free market system is a much more moral system because it doesn't rely on force. And that's the message that's the most difficult one to get across. But what you'll find is when the penny drops on that key issue, that free market systems rely on agreement between people and working together and cooperation and the lack of force compared to government-heavy systems. And start with communism, right? That's pretty government-heavy, and there's a lot of force involved in communism. Then you work your way through socialist states and whatnot. The free market system works so much better, and it's morally superior because it doesn't rely on the threat of jail or force just that threat is removed in a free market system.
The problem is you've got so many people entangled in the current system that they probably wouldn't even be able to develop that thought, to pull it apart, to deconstruct it to that point, to realize, oh, wait a minute, this is all under threat. And I mean, we can see the same just with the monetary system as well. They'll just tax you left, right, and center, and then now you've got people spruiking modern monetary theory, which is essentially just going to grow the government even more. And history will repeat sometimes. Maybe we won't learn, and we'll do the same things again and again. And it's concerning. But how is how's the libertarianism going in Australia from an Australian perspective? Is there much interest in it? I remember when we met at a conference you ran here in Queensland, probably about a year ago, a bit over a year now. And one line you were saying to some of the young guys that you'd flown over to the conference was taxation is theft. Trying to plant that seed there and get them fired up and just to get them thinking about it. How is it happening? Is it growing in Australia here? Are more people getting interested? What's your take on that?
Look, I think the labels are a barrier to thinking about that sort of thing. I think the scale. People work on a left and right scale in politics, right? There's the left wing and there's the right wing. There's the Conservatives and there's the Labor Party. But the way I look at it is it's authoritarian scale. There's to what degree is government involved or issuing commands over you, versus to what degree aren't they doing that? So the more free would be less authoritarian, the less free would be more authoritarian. And my perception is that politics is inevitably rolling and creeping towards more authoritarianism. There are exceptional circumstances where that's not the case. And Australia, by any measure, internationally, is a free market system, but it's creeping the wrong way. And what I've perceived, or what we've witnessed over the last 6 months, is that we're hanging on by our fingernails, and we've all let go now. We've basically ceded all control over to the state. The state have got us going down a path that many of us won't agree with, and instead of voluntarily or asking the population to voluntarily comply. So, I don't know. Do you want to talk about how a libertarian would handle a pandemic?
Yeah, no. Let's. What did I go through? I'll bring that up. This is a paper by Dr. Henderson, and I actually found it on the American AEI. So it was a free market response to the pandemic. So I'd like to hear your take on it. I'll link to that up above.
All right. Okay, we'll do that. And I haven't read that article, so but. I mean, I would take I'd look at the Swedish model, right? Everyone's talking about Sweden because you know what, they're the outliers in a fashion. And when we say that, we don't say also that Australia and New Zealand are the outliers in terms of trying to eradicate the virus. So you've got these two extremes. You've got Australia and New Zealand, and then you've got the Swedish model. And I would say the Swedish model is far less authoritarian, which is crazy, right? Because Sweden is a socialist country, ordinarily associated with more authoritarianism, but they've taken very much a laissez-faire attitude to dealing with the virus. Then you've got Australia and New Zealand, which has got a very interventionist and command-driven program to deal with the virus. And then you've got most other countries in the middle there somewhere. So what Sweden have done is they've basically used the government to put in very few restrictions, but communicate the dangers of what's going on. And so what the country's actually what's happened is that people have self-isolated voluntarily. They've, the restaurant trade's down by 90%, even though the restaurants are open and they're trying to trade. The economy's shrunk, but it's done voluntarily. People have self-isolated. Now, those 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds that have first basically got no chance of really dying from this virus, so slim. You've got more chance of getting eaten by a shark in Australia than you have, dying of the virus. When they're going out and they're keeping the bars and some of the restaurants open, they're getting the virus, they're recovering from the virus, no one's dying from the virus. And what they're doing is they're building up that herd immunity. But it's all voluntarily and it's all rational. It's rational for young people to believe that the virus is no more than any worse than a common cold, because the data and the evidence shows that it is no more than a common cold. So it's rational for young people not to self-isolate as much as the older people who are more vulnerable. Now, early days, Sweden stuffed it up like most countries have, and they let the virus get into the nursing homes. So they lost, they've admitted this, they've lost far more people in the nursing homes than they should have. The nursing homes, by and large, are controlled by the state. So, we're seeing this in Australia, right? The federal government and the state governments are arguing about who's responsible for the nursing homes. They go, well, whichever government is responsible, it's one of the governments, right? Sweden, to me, has taken much more laissez-faire effect. But what's happened is their economy's only shrunk by 8%. The UK, which did go into lockdown and did all the draconian lockdown and forced closures of businesses, their economy's shrunk by 20%. Which, and they've had as many deaths per capita than Sweden has. So for me, I think as a libertarian, I think the better approach would have been to let people make their own decisions. If they're vulnerable, if they're older, they would voluntarily self-isolate. If they're younger, they would go out, they may catch the virus. Very slight chance, very slim, almost incalculable small chance of dying from the virus. They recover from the virus. And what we've seen in Sweden is essentially herd immunity is about to take over. Sweden are pretty well done with the virus, right? It's taken 6 months. We're at the beginning. We're 6 months down the track. We've destroyed our economy, And we're still at the very beginning of this virus. So I fear where we're going to be in 12 months' time, Florian, but I'm pretty sure I know where Sweden will be.
I'll bring up the John Hopkins map here once it loads up, so we can just see the Sweden. Once it loads up, I've got MBN, government MBN doing real well.
Yeah.
And we'll see where they reached a peak and they've been going down since then, because I've been watching them too out of interest. And we can see here. I mean, I think the real indicator will be in 2 or 3 years' time. The size of the middle class. I think that will be the indicator of which economies have come out the better of this. Because I suspect here in Australia, it's going to be the smaller businesses, the family businesses that are really going to cop it, that are just getting destroyed left, right, and centre. You're seeing it. JobKeeper is keeping some businesses alive that should have gone under. The number of insolvencies is actually half of what it should have been. And whereas the big businesses, the big boys, the ones with the ability to lobby and negotiate with government, they seem to be doing a little bit better, aren't they? Even the shopping centres don't have any restrictions. So we can see Sweden here.
Yep, no, go on.
I'll just what were you going to say? That'll give me time to find Sweden.
I was just sort of amused by the Commonwealth Bank's reporting of a profit increase, the underlying profit being only a 10% drop. And they're incredibly entangled with government. Government programs are assisting them with mortgage abatements, and so you're right. Those that are entangled with government are doing well. The political class and the medical class, who are basically shutting down the economy, they're flying through this pandemic. Right? They're loving it. They're getting more control. Their budgets are getting bigger. The Medicrats are getting influence over us. They're not losing one iota of income out of this, and yet the small businesses, the smaller organisations, they're getting absolutely smashed. That NBN again.
Yep. It's okay. I'll cut it out, but it gave me a chance to find Sweden right here. So you can see here in the little chart where they've peaked and now they've head down. Their global deaths are 5,774 out of 23,000 cases. Now, that's in Stockholm. But the global deaths are over 5,000. One thing that's interesting is that the reporting in the media is always about the number of cases. But when you look at maps like this, you look at the mortality and you look at what the percentages of it are, you can make you should be able to, as an individual, to make a risk assessment of yourself and then manage that risk. At least that's what I'm used to. When I design a building, I have to think about all the risk factors in it, and all of us in business have to make those decisions. It's just, I guess, certain, shall we say, more authoritarian-leaning aspects of our political system probably don't think the average punter has the capability to make that risk. That's why they take so many responsibilities off people again and again and again.
It's the nanny state on steroids is what we're experiencing here. And, when I tell my European friends that we need to wear bicycle helmets, they think it's laughable. It's and that's the thin edge of the wedge, right? When you start thinking that adults need to be protected from riding a bike, it's very easy to start to believe that adults need to be protected from catching a flu-like virus.
Well, we see it in construction now. If you've got a window on a first story and there's ever going to be a child's bedroom, you can't open the window more than 100 millimeters.
Yeah,
so you've got to factor that in the design. And the research that was based on was midwives looking at children falling out of bunk beds in hospitals or on beds in hospitals. Right. And so then now they put these restrictions in place. That'll have airflow issues, and you won't get enough fresh air in your house. You're paying. So it just shows you how one thing can lead to another, and you can't even open a bloody window in a house in Australia. I mean, it's just nuts. It really is.
Yeah.
So. Yep. What about the future? What are some takeaways you'd give for someone in the audience that's watching this and likes your barbecue style motto? Don't take people's stuff and don't hurt people. That's the new motto for Australia going forward. What advice would you give them, or what encouragement would you give them to get involved or to get more politically active? I would encourage.
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that we could create a bit more of a movement, but I think the thing that I'd say first and foremost is that try and understand, try and form some sort of philosophical basis of how you think about these things. And I think that particular motto, don't hurt people, don't take them their stuff, is something that everyone can understand, right? And then it trickles down from there. So until you sort your own thoughts out, it's hard to know how to be an activist about anything, right? I look at the conservative parties at the moment, and I can see that they're struggling with how to deal with this pandemic. And they've fallen on the authoritarian big government side in the main. Okay, and I fear for that. I fear for them for that, because what that tells me is they've lost their liberal underpinnings, their liberal sort of philosophical base on which to fall back on. So, I would suggest, if I was to talk to anyone, I would say, well, first of all, just sort your thoughts out. Why do you think this? Why, why does this make sense? And then start thinking about, well, is it rational? Like the big thing is, Florian, is it rational for someone, for example, to give up a great paying job to become an activist in the liberty movement? Now, if you're going to do that, you don't do it for self-interested sort of money-making reasons. You do it for altruistic reasons, or you do it for reasons that are different from those sort of reasons, traditional reasons. So you've got to find a passion within yourself to actually be involved in this. And you've got to, for me, it's very rewarding in a sense, because it's something that, I get enthused about every day, to think about these issues and try and move the needle a little bit, in a certain direction. But it can be incredibly frustrating, and certainly it's not very financially rewarding. But it can be eye-opening, and it can be intellectually stimulating as well. And I think if people can find something in any of those areas that really gets them moving in the morning, then I think there's lots of opportunities to become activists. And certainly, if anyone wanted to get involved, they could reach out to me personally, and we could talk about that.
What about reaching out to the younger generation, trying to, because you're mentioning the Conservative Party here in Australia, that honestly, I feel like we've got, two parties. You've got Labor Light, and they both just orbit the Greens' preferences. It feels like they're heading towards that way with every election and some of the policies that are coming out. Because you've got a lot of interventionist policies coming out of the Liberal Party as well, who are meant to be more conservative. And Labor, some of the things that they're coming out with now. Look at some of their assumptions regarding gender pay gaps and all of these things that have been proven to not exist, and it's an earnings gap. And in a merit-based society, we should be encouraging people who work harder get rewarded more. But that's now part of their policy now, and that's affecting their decisions. And they've got policies coming out that are discriminating against people based on characteristics that they were born with, and it's crazy. It seems to be antithetical to everything we were taught coming up here in Australia. Now it's going the other way. So I'm hoping you can reach out more young people. You got to get your T-shirts printed. Don't take people's stuff. Be nice to them and get on Instagram or Twitch or something like that to get the young vote.
Taxation is theft. Taxation is theft.
That's it.
Look, we're actually looking at launching an organisation targeting at young people. Now, I have more to say about that in a couple of months, but that's looking like a pretty exciting sort of initiative. And you know what? The universities are under the pump. The universities are, they're turning into some sort of woke, political correct bloody wasteland. And I think, and there's certainly resentment amongst some young people about what their universities are turning into, and what they're restricting. The sort of the limitation on thinking and the controls over thinking, and how there's only right think that's allowed. So we're looking at pitching into that area and trying to organise and try and make a bit of an impact there. The Institute of Public Affairs have a Generation Liberty movement, which is very good, very good. So in terms of those young people, I love what they're doing and getting them organised, but there's always more you can do. CPAC in the US, in Washington, they get about 20,000 people. 40% of those are under 25. So they do a brilliant job in attracting the youth movement along to those Republican sort of events. which is tremendous. And I'd like to see CPAC in Australia. We've got CPAC in Sydney on the 4th of November, and we're really trying hard to get as many young people along to that as well.
Oh, fantastic! That'll be good to see when it comes closer to the date. You have to get in touch again. I'll let more people know about it.
Okay,
I've brought up the American one here, America versus Socialism. So, I mean, it'll definitely be entertaining to watch. I can show at least with the American election, it's entertaining for all of us over here in Australia. You know, we don't have as many characters as they get.
No, that's right. And see, we've pitched CPAC on the US election date. So we'll have some live crosses over to the US to see what's happening. One of our speakers from last year, Congressman Mark Meadows, he's become Trump's chief of staff. So he's very prominent in the Trump administration at the moment. I know he's working probably 18 hours a day at the moment. He's a workaholic, that guy. But that's what they need to do to win elections over there. It's full on. It's a much more genteel undertaking here in Australia.
Yeah, I think that's the nicest way to put it, really. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and your insights into the state of Australia at the moment and some of the impacts on our liberty. I hope there'll be a turnaround. I hope more people will wake up and become politically active. I'd love to see. One thing I think we have an advantage here in Australia is, if people know how to use preferences and they realise voting for a minor party isn't a waste, and that's a really powerful thing that we have here that a lot of people don't have. And just getting people learning about that. I'd love to have a mixed House of Reps, because I don't know if you saw, we had the cash ban legislation where they're restricting our ability to spend 10 grand, at a business. You go to jail. And I was watching the speeches in the House of Reps, and some Katter was up there, and of course he's a character, giving some interesting speeches about using cashies to pay for things back in the day. But it was a good mix of people across the political spectrum arguing against it, and the chamber was empty. They all just walked in, didn't listen, vote, and walked out. I mean, what's the point then of having a bloody democracy where these people are meant to represent us when they're not even listening to arguments? So that got me really frustrated, to be honest, just seeing that. And I've lost you again. I'm talking to myself.
Just lost you there, mate.
Yep. I was just saying that got me really frustrated seeing that a House of Reps are not actually doing anything. But
the Liberal Democrats, used to have a federal senator. Liberal Democrats are Australia's Libertarian Party, and they had a federal senator, David Lionhelm. But the Liberal Party colluded with the Greens to change the Senate voting rules, and that cleared out a whole bunch of independent senators. And the Senate is supposed to be a proportionate house. It's supposed to represent broadly, percentage-wise, the different political groups within the country. Now it's been squeezed up, and it's more just a two-party system in the upper house as well. And the negative of that is that they don't care about the few crossbenchers that exist anymore, because they've got the numbers. So it's an interesting political situation at the moment, Florian. I think there's going to be a reckoning in 12 months' time when the fallout of this COVID thing sort of the economic fallout starts to really bite, and also the fact that Europe and the US will be all open up, and what will we be doing? I think there will be a reckoning, and at that moment, I hope that people really start to think about, well, what is the role of government in their lives? And maybe that'll be the libertarian moment.
Perhaps it will. I think we'll leave you on that. Andrew Cooper, there will be a reckoning. Fantastic. Thanks, mate. I appreciate the time. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Florian. Bye.
Bye.